Personalizing student engagement is only possible when enrollment management and Marcom are aligned. At Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, Ryan Hogan's team uses Element 451 to improve student outcomes.
They love the AI functions where if they're coming up with an email campaign, they can ask it to help develop something and then they go in and edit that. They also really enjoy the use of the landing pages for the campaigns that we build. So not only do we design emails and things, but we can also have landing pages that can give information to our students. And so it really brings the team together. So our enrollment staff is helping identify what the issue is, and then the marketing and communication staff can collaborate with them in Element to provide the solution for the problem we're trying to solve.
Aligned teams create better experiences for students. Visit element451.com to learn how an AI-first student engagement platform fuels a smarter, more connected campus experience. Hi, I'm a Higher Ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I feel like higher education is barely scraping the surface when it comes to using artificial intelligence to improve the student lifecycle. So I was so excited to have this conversation with Dan Antonson, who's the Associate Vice President of Analytics and Technology Solutions at Collegis Education. In our conversation, we talk a lot about how we can actually use some of the latest tools that are available with artificial intelligence to personalize communications way beyond just changing the name and leading with "Hey, first name," but to really truly personalize communications in ways that drive change and drive action. So I hope you enjoyed this show. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I'm so happy to be here on the show with a fellow Minnesotan, although I am a recovering Minnesotan. Dan Antonson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
We were just talking about the way that Minnesota springs make you forget how awful Minnesota winters are. It's like when you have a kid and you forget how awful labor was after the kid is born. And that's why people have more than one child. But that's kind of Minnesota winters are the equivalent of that, I feel like.
Yep. And what do we say? There's never bad weather, just bad clothing.
I like that. As someone who fled Minnesota, I would argue that there is bad weather in Minnesota. But
fair.
That's fair. Well, we're not here to talk about Minnesota, as much fun as that could be, and probably how we could talk about that all day. We're here to talk about the student life cycle and AI and analytics and personalization, all that good stuff. And I'm going to just jump right in. When you think about the entire student life cycle, from that first inquiry that might happen in their sophomore year of high school, all the way to graduation or after graduation, or honestly, when the cradle to grave, for lack of a better term for it, where are you seeing AI make the biggest impact right now?
Yeah. When I look at AI, I'm sure like most people, it's going to touch every single part of the student journey, just as you said, right? From the very beginning to the clicking on advertisements, websites, to that basketball game. And I think we're all seeing it in our LinkedIn feeds too. AI is going to change the world, and I think it arguably already has. But your question on like what's the biggest difference or impact it's making right now? I'd have to say it's just unlocking those new streams of intelligence from unstructured data. And I know unstructured data is it's not a glamorous take, but it's really just a way of saying like all that information that's not in that clean Excel spreadsheet. And schools are swimming in this kind of unstructured data mess. And I think a really good example of that is call data, like call recording data. I think for years and years, higher education has been, recording calls for quality assurance and for compliance. And, I remember a decade ago working on these sentiment analysis projects, right? Where we were going to, look at keywords in the transcripts, which were always kind of, before AI, a little shaky to begin with. And we were trying to score whether a call was like good or bad, right? Was it positive or negative sentiment? And it was just this massive challenge because like the technology just wasn't there to get any value out of these recordings. And then social media came along and we tried to do the same thing, right? Looking at all these tweets, trying to analyze if it was good or bad. And then it was super time consuming. And even if you did all of that, what were you really going to do with that data? And, I think you fast forward to today and that's obviously changed with AI. AI can create those transcripts. It can analyze those conversations and then can do it at scale. So whether it's, prospective students in marketing, current students interacting with advising or support services, like I think AI can do all of those things that we just couldn't do before. And I think that this is really that kind of new stream of intelligence that I mentioned. So AI's reach is definitely going to expand everywhere. It's going to touch every part of the journey, but its current superpower in my mind is really, making sense of that previously hard to get, hard to use information. I think it's giving us insights that were almost impossible to scale before.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that as being data that you could leverage in a useful way. I mean, I know that those phone calls have been recorded for a long time, but thinking about then what you can do with that is really, really interesting. Like, what are schools doing with that unstructured data like that?
Yeah. I think it's two things. One, I think it's kind of your classic analytics, right? So creating business intelligence reports off those conversations and seeing, what are the themes, what are the trends in aggregate, right? We're looking at like the whole of the conversations. But I think what it really does is create this kind of personalization opportunity that was never there. I mean, we've been trying to personalize the student experience for a long time. Like that is not a new concept, but again, that kind of scale, getting the data to really do personalization is here, and I think it's a game changer. And to the kind of second example of personalization and how it's improving, I think outreach is just a really great example of that. And just as a kind of tangible, I think an accessible example, a starting point would be using AI to identify communication preferences. So, for instance, most schools have tools like Google Analytics tracking their website engagement and marketing activity. And I think by integrating this data, right, centralizing it and layering AI on top of it, we can start to kind of pinpoint patterns and preferences. So, as a prospective student, mostly active in the evenings? Are they browsing on weekends? And so I think instead of like blasting out your SMS messages or phone calls, emails, whatever, schools can start to use AI to understand these preferences and schedule their outreach to really, meet that prospective student, where they are. And I think that's a really like simple shift, but I think it's using AI to lean into those habits and, making the interactions feel a lot more considered. And it shows in the data. I mean, we just had a school that kind of deployed a similar use case to that, and that was a 20% improvement in their kind of initial contact rate just by like layering on that preference. And so that's a really simple example. But if you take that kind of up the sophistication curve, using AI to find those kind of behavioral signals where, understanding where somebody's at in their decision-making process. So, flagging if a student is, are they comparing programs versus somebody who's like deep into the financial aid part of the process, or someone looking at like the campus resources to see if it's the right fit for them. Like, of course, that's all enrollment oriented, but that's like, those are very different parts of the consideration set, right? And I think using AI to identify these hints, whether it be in phone calls, whether it be in like web analytics data, I think it really kind of creates this opportunity to tailor outreach to align with, what's going to resonate or be useful to the prospective learner. And you're naturally going to see better engagement and ultimately improvements in conversion and yield.
I love this definition of personalization as being something that's beyond, hey, first name,
Yeah.
because you're talking about personalization in terms of responding to their preference for how they're communicated to, and then what is the content that's being shared with them. And I think for years we've thought about personalization as just like literally, hey, first name.
Yeah, totally. And it was hard to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
because you had these little variables that you were kind of dumping into an email, and, then when it was wrong, it was like this weird, like, I think we've all seen the like hi, and it's like the curly brackets, like first name. It's like, whoops, that didn't work. And that's still obviously a thing. But, I think generative AI, especially, when you combine like this kind of idea of like a profile, and then you layer on these kind of new tactics, I think it really creates the scale we've just never had before.
I love that. We're right now in yield/summer melt season, right? Like this is, a lot of folks are probably in this exact moment anxious about fall, and is the class going to come together, and are they going to get, a worse yield rate than last year or better yield rate? And I'm really interested in how you think AI could help admissions and enrollment teams be more strategic, be more timely as we kind of approach those couple weeks right before classes begin, where the panicked phone calls tend to happen.
The panic mode. Yeah. It's such like a nail biter moment for these admissions teams. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like AI can, certainly make an impact in those critical weeks or months leading up to a class. But one opportunity that I see, and we've kind of already touched on this already, is this kind of development and management of what I would call this dynamic engagement profile. And so think of it like, at each stage of the journey from, acceptance to the first day of class, AI is looking at all of these sorts of data points. So just like we talked about before, right? How are they interacting with emails? Have they, signed up for orientation? Have they engaged with financial aid information? And that those are the ingredients that you need for useful prediction. And so I think when it comes to yield and summer melt, these profiles proactively flagging like who might be at risk for not showing up, or who seem less than engaged. And where it starts to become more strategic is, just like we talked about, instead of that kind of generic one size fits all with the first name at the top, you're starting to see AI enabling teams to prioritize their outreach, kind of tailor it to what someone might be thinking. So, if a student is flagged as less than engaged, or whatever the signal is, they might receive like a message from an admissions counselor, an invitation to an event, or what we've seen be really effective is connecting that incoming learner to a current student in that intended program, right? So introducing that kind of like social element to it. And but ultimately it's really about, that right nudge to the right student at the right time, and keeping that kind of connection warm, and addressing those hurdles before somebody kind of falls out of the process. And just these profiles become really important. We had a school who, really focused on that kind of admit to enroll, like yield and yield percentage. And, by using these profiles, they were able to increase it by almost 2/3, 66% increase in that yield. And so, but you have to activate that profile. Like you can't just create it and let it sit there. You have to operationalize it, which is the hard work, right? These profiles, this is what I'm really just excited about, especially with the AI opportunity, is putting these profiles to work in other areas as well. So student success, for instance, keeping current students enrolled, these kind of at-risk profiles that we've seen really, really incredible results. We had a school, it was like a 97% term over term persistence. And
wow.
We had another school who was really creating these signals and these profiles to do outreach on stop outs or like unregistered students. And that effort to kind of help those students re-enroll, they ended up becoming like 10% of the incoming student population was these stop outs. And so now of course that's students already in school. It's not necessarily meld, but like that underlying principle is the same. It's using AI to identify who needs attention and determining what kind of support will be most effective at that moment. And this kind of data AI informed approach it's really effective in attacking that melt problem to make it less of a nail biter moment for them.
That's really interesting. I think I'm old enough and have worked in higher ed long enough now to remember when we were using Excel spreadsheets to keep track of how we communicated with students. And I remember I got to Radford University in 2010, and the VP for enrollment management there was like starting to build like predictive analytics modeling to be able to make predictions. And now, like little old me, little journalism major, has, I can take data and make prediction, build predictive analytic models. And I'm not a technologist. I am not that, but it's amazing how far things have advanced in 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really cool and interesting to me about technology is, of course, there's like more features and functionality coming out every day, but to me, it's almost like it's making these more sophisticated things just so much more accessible. Like, I know there's a whole thread on like AI replacing jobs and we need programmers and all of this. Like, yes, we're still going to need those things, but like data science, for instance, I think has been like something like really elusive for a lot of schools. And just exactly to your point is these tools are becoming super accessible. And that's something we haven't always seen in technology trends. Take big data, for instance. Like if you remember, it was big data, that was the thing. But big data required big hardware, big salaries for these like specialists. And the barriers to entry are just so much different than they were today. But Excel still exists and will never die because it's useful. So
yeah. No, that's such a good point. I just think about, submitting a request to the Office of Institutional Research for like some analysis of some data and getting like, thank you, we will get to this in 6 months.
Yep.
Because there'd be like 3 people who could do the kind of data analysis we needed, and they would have to prioritize that work and have everybody on campus need them for it. It was wild.
And what happens like in that kind of traditional BI moment is there's always another question. You would make it through the queue,
Mm-hmm.
You would get your dashboard or report or your data request, and then you would go naturally like, oh, I see something in the data and I need something else. And but you wouldn't ask for it because you knew it was going to take, months and months potentially to get that again. And so I think for a long time, there were these data needs that just were unmet. And I think now with the tooling we have and the tools that are coming, I mean, this is all happening in real time. We're at the beginning of it. And so I think, but I do think that kind of accessibility and adoption just making these tools accessible is gonna be there. And that's really exciting, especially for higher ed, which hasn't always had access to these resources to do these more advanced things.
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of schools out there that I think are rightfully putting their focus slightly less on recruitment, not, taking their eye off of recruitment, but they're thinking about retention. And retention really starts when a student is onboarded, right?
Yes.
Have you seen ways that AI is improving like that student onboarding, that like first year experience for students?
Yeah. So early in my career in analytics and higher ed, we saw really consistently that kind of early first year onboarding experience was just so predictive to the rest of somebody's success in their studies and their academics. And one of the things that we found was that a really important ingredient to that was, could the learner, did they know how to find support resources? And that was, again, just this major predictor for student success. Like if the student could find the library resources or schedule time with academic support, we just knew that they were on a better track, like right from the get-go. And I think where AI fits into that equation is really supercharging like how students connect with those resources and find the information that they need right from day one. And I think probably the most visible classic example is that AI powered assistant chatbot, right?
Yeah.
And so like new students have a million questions, right? So like, where is the financial aid office? How do I register for this? What are the library hours? And I think AI assistants can provide that kind of instant 24/7 answers to these really common questions, which I think is like just a huge help in like navigating, like being in a new environment, right? Like finding your way around. But I think going beyond that kind of simple AI powered Q&A, I think the real power that's emerging is using AI to create these kind of personalized pathways for support. So, for instance, based on a student's program, their initial interactions, maybe even questions they've asked before, AI can proactively suggest relevant resources. And I think that proactive is the key word here, right? So, maybe it's like proactively suggesting a workshop for certain skills or a specific student club, or, a nudge to connect with advising. And I think it's about creating those roads that lead directly and efficiently to the support resources that somebody actually needs, potentially before someone even really realizes it. And the advice I'd give to schools is to really think strategically about how these tools and support resources are integrated and connected, because it's not about launching a bot, right? It's doing an inventory of what are all of the different support services, whether it be academic, wellness, social, and ensuring that your AI can intelligently and proactively guide students to those resources. And so, I think the goal, of course, is to make students, feel supported and confident in finding help. And like I mentioned, and as we know, that's a really important ingredient for that first year persistence.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the layers where marketing can fit into this too, it's like how that support is messaged, how you kind of make it seem like it's coming from a place of care and concern and not necessarily intrusive, if that makes sense. So I think the messaging around that's really important. But I also think that there's some things that marketing offices need to do to kind of prime students for, like, here's tutoring support, here's mental health support, here's whatever, destigmifying some of that, like the use of tutoring, taking, football players or, the SGA president or whatever, people who are influential on campus who are saying like, I take advantage of tutoring, or I go to office hours, or I do all of this, so that students, when they get those nudges, are a little bit more primed to accept them too. Like, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And I think those support resources are just, again, like such a predictor for success. And I think leaning into that is the strategy, is the strategy here.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really curious because I hear this a lot. I hear this a lot, that there's this fear that AI is going to depersonalize support. And that's honestly like one of the number one critiques that I hear, I guess, about using AI. And I'm really interested in how you think institutions can balance using AI with making sure that we're not losing that human touch that students crave, need, deserve, all of the adjectives. Like, what are your thoughts on like avoiding this depersonalization of content?
Yeah. I mean, let's be real. If AI isn't implemented thoughtfully, like there is a real risk that it could feel like not authentic. And I think we're already seeing a lot of kind of generic AI generated like content out there, or like what people are calling AI slop. And I think students, and frankly just people, I think definitely are looking for that human connection, like assuming it's expected, right? Like I don't think a genuine human response is required for checking out at the bookstore, for instance, right? I don't need to be friends with an AI chatbot. That's just a directory, right?
Right.
But in my mind, I think the objective here isn't for AI to replace the human touch. I think it's here to enhance it and in a way make space for it. So, just like I said, like the directory style chatbot is awesome. It's just such a great way to handle the routine transactional questions, whatever. And it can be 24/7. And that is where AI efficiency, I think, really, really shines. But I think by automating some of these tasks, though, of the routine, we're actually freeing up our human staff, the advisors, the counselors, the support teams, to focus on the more complex, nuanced situations. And I mean, like, take student success, that can be really complicated, right? Like social, human services style issues around housing, food insecurity. Like those are some really tough things that do need humans to sort through and figure out to create real long lasting solutions for these learners. And so, I think by spending less time on the repetitive administrative tasks and more time having meaningful interactions with students who I think genuinely need that like deeper level of support. So my hope is that all of this creates space for that. That's where my thoughts are.
Want to know what AI-powered people-focused really looks like? The 2025 Engage Summit will show you how AI transforms engagement without losing the human touch. Join us June 24th and 25th in Charlotte for actionable insights, hands-on demos, and transformative strategies. Enrollify listeners save $50 with code Enrollify50. Sign up at engage.element451.com. That's exactly what I tell people. Just, how much of your time is spent doing mundane stuff or doing stuff that's important, but time consuming and doesn't require human creativity or human judgment or fill in the blank. That frees up so much time to do more high touch stuff. And it frees up time for you to maybe be thinking strategically about other things that you could be offering or other services or supports that you could give to students. And no student is like, gee, I wish my admissions office was spending more time visualizing data. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, totally.
That's not it. They're wishing somebody would like help them figure out how to register or help them, fill in the blank. So yeah, I agree so much. But that said, I mean, I do think there's a lot of power that comes with AI. And with that, as the poet said, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm really interested in your thoughts around like the ethical concerns. And one of the things that I often, when I give workshops, people often ask me about ethics and I usually do a segment on ethics, and a lot of folks are like, what do we need to be worried about from an ethical perspective? I would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, was that was Uncle Ben, right? Or was it
Yeah.
Rousseau or Voltaire? One of them. With great power comes great responsibility. I mean, gosh, I think that's exactly right. AI has given all of us this kind of crazy new power, right, into the world, and then of course now to education, and but I think these kind of ethical considerations have always been a part of or always evolved alongside technology, right? Like, so,
Mm-hmm.
take digital analytics, and that was privacy concerns and accessibility and affordability and all of that. And I think AI brings some of these issues to new levels, and it's going to need deliberate thought and ultimately deliberate action. When I talk to higher ed leaders who are asking these questions around AI, there's of course, just as I mentioned, like data privacy and security is I think number one. I think these AI systems, especially those personalizing experiences or even predicting outcomes, like this is a lot of data, right? How is it being collected? Where is it stored? How is it being used? How is it being
Mm-hmm.
protected? Who has access to it? Students, parents. I think all of us, we need to be confident that the information, that the data is secure and that it's being used responsibly. I think bias and fairness, which is a
Mm-hmm.
huge one. Like these algorithms they're trained on data, and if that data has biases in it, whether it's racial, socioeconomic, like the AI can perpetuate these things, or in a lot of cases, like amplify them. So like how does personalization, this capability, how does it impact admissions decisions and
Mm-hmm.
identifying like at-risk students, or like even how assignments are graded? And, I think all of that requires a level of transparency and accountability. And I think like transparency is the big one here, where, students and staff and everyone should understand like where and when AI is being used, like how is it chosen for this task. And I'm not saying everybody has to get into the trenches of AI and how it exactly works, but we should broadly know how it works. And
Mm-hmm.
if AI makes a mistake or it's a questionable recommendation, who's accountable for that? Like there needs to be really clear lines of responsibility. And I think feedback mechanisms are going to be super important with all of these things, right? Like who's monitoring this, who's doing the analysis, like is this effective? And and all of that is around this kind of, I think at the even higher level is just like, what is like we're in higher education, we are educating folks, and so how does this impact learning, right? Like
Right.
if this AI tutor, if this becomes the primary source of help, like how does that actually impact somebody's critical thinking or problem solving skills? I mean, we talked earlier about just like essays, right? Like, is this really the outcome we want when a student is using ChatGPT to like blindly submit an essay? Like I would argue no, but I think that's also up for debate, right? Like let's talk about this. And I think that's my big advice is institutions should be, if they haven't already, be creating these AI governance committees. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is not an IT function, which I see happen quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit, where it's data, it's AI, it's technology, give it, make it an IT thing. But I think it needs to be cross-functional, including faculty, the academic leaders, and I think even ideally student representation, right? And I think I know every AI committee, depending on how it's structured, has its own goals, but I think the big ones are just proactively discussing these ethical questions that,
Mm-hmm.
inventorying what are the tools that are being used, or what are we considering to doing. And making the policies, the standards, the guidelines like clear, and of course, just monitoring the ongoing effectiveness. So this isn't going to ever be a one-time conversation for anybody, especially as it's evolving. But, I think making a commitment to ensuring AI is being used responsibly and is the key here. And that's what every school should be thinking about.
Yeah. There was a couple of things you said that I want to really underscore, and that is that bias piece. I show in my workshops that I used Midjourney and asked it to create an image of a doctor, and how it creates the 4 different images. Every one of those 4 was a white man.
Yep.
And we know that that's not what the medical profession looks like anymore. There's bias in that. I asked it to create a nurse. Everyone was a young white woman. It was very stark. And that's a visual example of the kind of bias that exists in these. And that's why I use it, because, the visual examples kind of illustrate it better. But there's also, I see and hear people. I just talked to someone last week about hey, can we use Hey Jen to make it look like our professor is speaking Spanish, welcoming students, doing a welcome video for students, and it changes their mouth so it looks like they're speaking Spanish. And I think it's super cool, but I also think there's what are the ethics of do you say, hey, we created this in AI? And if you don't say that, that's incredibly misleading to imply that your president speaks fluent Spanish with a particular accent from a region in Mexico or something.
Yeah, totally.
And they don't speak a lick of Spanish. And then a student comes up to them and starts speaking to them in Spanish, and they have to be oh, I don't know. There's a lot of little things like that thinking about the data sourcing and what tools you're going to use and what are the standards for how that data is kept safe when you use those tools, and all of that is super important. But even the content and the output that you generate with these tools, I think you need to have some conversations around what you will and will not do. And I really encourage people to don't just start using AI, right? Be really thoughtful and intentional about how you're using AI, what tools you're using, how you're going to, check for bias, fairness, cultural sensitivity, how you're going to, encourage responsible content creation, how you're going to make sure that things are accurate. I mean, I have seen a student work where they have turned in papers that had made up sources or made up citations. That's not just happening to students in that case. That's happening, in the work that we're doing as professionals too. So I totally agree with you. We just have to do better about, we can't let this be the Wild West, the way social media was or the way the internet was. We need to put parameters around it now because it's so powerful.
I love the visual example. As somebody who, I spend my time in databases and stuff like that, that not as much on the creative side, but those are such great examples because, imagine that same bias in a large data set that you're making real decisions on shaping classes. And that needs to be out in the open. And I think intentional and responsible. And there's no easy answers. I mean, these are things we're going to wrestle with for a long time, but you have to put the structure around it to have those conversations and to have those forums. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And that's what's really important.
And I think you're going to have admissions essays written by bots and then reviewed by bots.
Yeah, AI on top of AI, totally. Right. With some more AI on top of it.
Right. And I've mentioned before on this show that I believe this is still the case, that in the state of Virginia, you can't make decisions using AI. So you can't just dump admission, applications into a system and then use AI to make those decisions.
Yeah.
But I know that's not the case everywhere. And I know that's not the case necessarily at private institutions.
Yeah.
And it's there's a point where, are we really going to say human judgment is not needed in this decision making?
Totally. Yeah, that's the legal side of things is a really important call out too, because we know that that's going to evolve. We know it's going to evolve. So how are we keeping track of those things, but also putting it into our practices, but also balancing that with what we believe higher education should be. And I think this AI stuff, I mean, at the meta level, it's going to be like, what does it mean to be human when we have all of these tools? But also, like, what do we want the human experience to look like? But maybe that's a separate podcast.
That feels super, super deep.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, what advice would you give to institutions that are like, we know we need to be doing stuff, but we're either overwhelmed, we don't know where to start, we don't have the I talked to a school earlier this week that was like, we just don't have the money to do this at scale. I would love to hear your thoughts about what they should do.
Yeah. With all these, headlines and content and capabilities and podcasts, right? There's obviously a lot of buzz around this topic. And I think it can, sometimes even I feel overwhelmed with all the things that it can do. And sometimes there's things I want to do, but like just the resources aren't there, especially for some like massive AI overhaul, right? Like, as you said, this stuff costs money. And I think more importantly, it's time, because any time you invest in AI or anything means that it's opportunity cost. It means that there's time not spent elsewhere. So, I guess my core advice, and I think you said part of this earlier, is just like, don't start with AI, start with understanding your processes. And like, I really can't stress this enough. Like, often, like, I see a school get like really caught up in thinking that like AI is the end goal here. Like, it's the shiny output. But in reality, like, AI is just a function. Like, it's a tool that can be applied within a process. It isn't the process, it's within the process. So before you think of any specific AI solutions, like, I always say, like, get your teams together and get really tight on understanding the process you're trying to improve, and also understand like the ripple effect, because these things don't just happen in vacuums. Like, something you do enrollment that impacts things downstream. And like, so you have to really understand that. So take student enrollment. My advice is to literally bust out the sticky notes, grab a whiteboard, do a napkin sketch, do like whatever it takes, and like map out your current process with your teams. And what are all of the touch points from the initial inquiry to a student's first day? What steps are involved? Who's responsible for what? What are the handoffs? And if you get clear on how things work today, it starts to create a forum for change. And so I lead these napkin sketch exercises where we do these mapping projects. And every time I do these exercises, somebody in the room always says, wow, I didn't realize that's how it actually worked. And so I think like mapping processes, it does like two things. One, I think it cuts through the noise and the hype of AI. So instead of chasing like this vague idea of doing AI, it really forces you to get like kind of specific on like what area we're trying to make better. And it kind of grounds the conversations. And then secondly, and like I think more importantly, is when schools do these like deep dives into their processes, like oftentimes they find that like the solution or improvement they need doesn't involve AI at all.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, there's these redundant steps or these communication gaps. And so like people in the rooms like I've been in will like say to each other, like, wait, why are we doing this? Like, could this be solved like this? And like, to me, those are wins in and of themselves. Like, you don't need AI to do that. And, but like, once you do have a clear map of how things work and you've identified the pain points or the opportunities, like, then you can start to ask like, okay, is there a specific part of this process where AI could genuinely help us be more efficient or effective or provide a better experience? And these kind of napkin sketches, they become the business case actually for funding the resources, because you can say like, look, here's how this works. Here's what I'm trying to improve. And here's what I need to make this improvement. Do we want to do this? Do we want to fund this? So like, I just can't stress enough, like whether it's an IT project, whether it's data, like whatever it is, like figure out your process first and then work backwards from there and see if it's a fit. And it's just a much more focused and I think often more manageable way to begin. And I haven't found anything that's a better springboard than a whiteboard.
I love that. And it just really speaks to like the need to be intentional and not like, because you sometimes hear people want to just deploy a technology because they went to a booth at a conference and the technology sounded cool, but they don't even know what problem they're solving with that technology. So yeah, I think that's super, super smart. This has been such a great conversation. Where can people find you if they want to chat more?
Yeah, you bet. I'm active on LinkedIn and certainly post content also on our collegiseducation.com, and you can find me there.
Awesome. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, Jaime, or on my website, solvehighered.com. You can email me at jamie@solvehighered.com. I love hearing from listeners, so please feel free to reach out at any time. And in the meantime, let's go bust some silos. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.